Hi, future bureaucrats of India. This is Arjun R. Shaankar, and welcome to LearnStroke. Let's discuss the current affairs review, which we call it as the Simply Simplified, an exclusive section where we do the daily current affairs review for civil service examination. And you are doing it with me, Arjun R. Shankar. And let's take the important topics of the day. We are going to discuss about the Iran nuclear deal, the P5+1, and the JCPOA. What do you mean by that? And we'll discuss about the Karen and the Kachin rebels of Myanmar and the PEGIDA. What do you mean by the PEGIDA? The new movement coming up in Germany. Discuss about the offshore and onshore industry dynamics, because we talk about offshore industry and India is going to gain a lot of momentum this year. And the RBI's RRA 2.0, which means Regulatory Review Authority. We're going to discuss about the PM KISAN. You should know the name of the scheme and what are the benefits, because PM KISAN has been rolled out in some parts of India, especially in West Bengal. And what is an antibody cocktail? It is said as a new hope for corona. So all these are the important news items that appeared in today's newspaper that we have to decode and make a review. So welcome to Simply Simplified, and let's decode each and every issue one by one. And let's begin the first review with the important topic called as the US-Iran nuclear deal. What is the nuclear deal? That means they talk about the Iran nuclear deal. What is so important about Iran nuclear deal? We have to discuss the most important points of Iran nuclear deal, and we'll clearly know that this is a very old, that means at least 2015 old, and US and Iran have a very old relationship. So this deal, the Iran nuclear deal, was seen as one of the biggest monumental diplomatic achievements of the Obama government, because they persuaded Iran to sign a deal, especially when it comes to nuclear energy. And everything went haywire when Donald Trump actually pulled out USA from this nuclear deal, even stunning the American allies like UK, France, Germany, and other European countries. The American government stunned everybody by pulling out. And we have to discuss this Iran nuclear deal from all this perspective. We have to discuss it from the perspective of United States, and what is the history, what is this nuclear deal all about. So recently the current affairs news says that, and that is what they're saying, the talks intensify of bringing US back. So the US is coming back. There is a talk going on a higher level where they want to bring the United States back to the Iran nuclear deal. And in this context, what are the important points to be discussed? We'll discuss them one by one. And let's take a close look at it. First of all, you need to know what you mean by US-Iran nuclear deal. You should know that this whole premise revolves around the concept of Iran. You know that Iran has the capability of nuclear power. That is something very alarming. According to the world, the America and European nations, they have a big problem when Iran is actually having a nuclear power. And similarly, what they did is they put a lot of sanctions. They put a lot of sanctions on Iran. Sanctions in different ways, trade, export, everything. That means they try to control the whole of Iran. They put a lot of sanctions. And finally, Obama's period was a monumental period. When Obama's administration, it was seen as the highest diplomatic achievement of the United States government, when they made Iran and the other group of countries to come together and signed what is called as a nuclear deal. That was a big achievement that was seen. So a nuclear deal was signed, and the United States of America, and the deal with Iran is what is we call as the P5+1 countries. So which are the P5+1 countries? We have to find out which are the P5+1 countries. And along P5+1, they signed what is called as a JCPOA. What do you mean by a JCPOA? So this is the whole scenario when Iran at the center, in spite of the sanctions, that this is Iran here, and there are a lot of sanctions imposed on Iran, and the countries, including United States of America, the P5+1 countries signed the JCPOA. And what does that mean? A JCPOA, when you sign this, what happens? The sanctions, they signed that. When the JCPOA was signed, what happens is Iran will have to submit to a lot of procedures, and lot of procedures, one by one. You should know that they will curtail the use of nuclear power. They will curtail the nuclear, and they will contain the enrichment of uranium. Very, very important point. They will contain the enrichment of uranium, and they will limit the centrifuges machines. Very, very important for nuclear power. They will control or limit the centrifugal machines of nuclear power. They'll control that. They'll control the enrichment of uranium, and they'll do one more thing. They will allow the IAEA, the international agency, the Atomic Energy Agency, they will actually let IAEA to inspect the power plants, the nuclear power plants of Iran. They will allow them to visit and check the Iran nuclear plants and see whether Iran is actually on a controlled nuclear power. That means apart from the energy resources, of Iran, the other thing of making nuclear bomb, of developing nuclear energy, enrichment of uranium, and the centrifuges machines, everything, every nuclear activity apart except for the energy making will stop. And who will ensure that this is happening? The IAEA. Very, very important. You should know the agency. The IAEA will make sure that they'll check it. Once everything is in check, you know what will happen? Once everything is in check, United States of America and the other countries who have signed the nuclear deal will lift the sanctions. That means there are no more sanctions on Iran, and this was the agreement, and that is the basis of this agreement. I hope this is very clear. So Iran concluded with everything. They made the proper checks, and finally the sanctions on Iran was initially lifted. This is the first story. The sanction on Iran was slowly lifted. And what happened after that? The sanction of Iran was lifted, and after some time, the government of the Washington, USA, was very skeptical regarding this. The administration of United States of America was very doubtful, because the nuclear deal contained an important item, very, very important, because the nuclear deal contained an important concept called as sunset clause. Very, very important. Majority of the nuclear deal contained sunset clauses. That means majority of them were to expire, because 2015 was a very important year which they made important achievements in the nuclear deal, and they had a lot of sunset clauses. That means majority of the clauses that they sign will expire in 10 years. That is 2025. There was many agreements which were expiring. Iran could again use the nuclear power, and by 2030 they could maximize the enrichment. So this was the reason that majority of the deal contains sunset clauses which will eventually expire, and by 2030 probably Iran could again start making nuclear power or nuclear bomb. So this was one of the big reasons which USA found as annoying, and what they did is they jumped out, they pulled out from the deal. The USA pulled out from the nuclear deal, and that annoyed many European countries which are the allies like Britain, France, Germany, Russia. Majority of the countries were really unhappy with this decision. So finally that was the most important scenario of this US-Iran nuclear deal. And after so many years, the President of the United States, Joe Biden, has extended that the US government wishes to come back to the deal. This is what is an important topic here in this discussion. So I think this was the most important things that we discussed, and I think now we'll closely look at the most important points that are here. The US is coming back, as you know. they have signed willingness to work out the stumbling blocks, and the US pulled out. This is something I told you. US pulled out from the landmark 2015 deal, and they wish to renegotiate it. Very important point. And the deal had promised Iran what? Economic incentives in exchange of curbs. And the Trump administration reimposed heavy sanctions on Islamic. Once the US government pulled back, they brought the sanctions again. So what happened? Iran did not stop. Why should Iran stop? What did Iran do? Iran steadily increased the violations of the deal by enriching uranium to a greater permitted than the permitted level. So Iran started to enrich uranium to a greater purity level which they have agreed. So Iran did not stop. When US left out, Iran also did not stop. The sanctions came, and some sanctions came after 90 days, and some sanctions were to come after 180 days. So that means sanctions had to come. So these are the important points that we discussed, and let's discuss the other important points that we have known. The US President Joe Biden say he wants to rejoin the deal. As I said, US wants to come back. And what do you mean by JCPOA? In 2015, they signed what is called as the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, which is called as JCPOA. So this is what they signed, and the pact is meant to prevent Iran from obtaining nuclear bomb, something the country. Iran insists that all sanctions must be lifted before it reverses the violation. So this was the part of the treaty which I told you. I think you're getting a good idea about all this, the Iran nuclear deal. And let's take a look at this. What you see, that the things that you see here are called as the centrifuges, machines which are used for that. And you should know some history. In July 2015, Iran and 6 countries reached a historic agreement, JCPOA. And which are the 6 countries? They are the P5+1, which are the 5 permanent members of the UN Security Council. That means you will discuss about the US, France, UK, China, Russia, and Germany. That means that is P5+1, the 5 Security Council permanent members, plus Germany. And what did Iran agree? Iran agreed to reduce the number of centrifuges, the tube-shaped machines that help enrich uranium by 2/3. Very important. This is what you see as the centrifuges machine. They wanted to cut it down. According to the treaty, they will cut it down to 2/3. That means this is a tube-shaped machine which enriches uranium. And it also reduces the stockpile of enrichment of uranium by 98% and limit enrichment. So what does that mean? These were the most important agreements that they signed in. And also important, they said that they would allow enriched uranium to maintain the country's energy needs. They said they will only maintain the energy needs. Apart from that, according to the treaty, they don't have the nuclear power, and that should be stopped. And Iran also, as I said in the before, the International Atomic Energy Agency, the IAEA, UN's nuclear watchdog. So please, all the people who don't know about IAEA, you should definitely find out the UN's nuclear watchdog agency, and they will verify everything, whether the important parts of the treaty are verified. And once that is being done, the sanctions will be lifted. So this was the condition of Iran nuclear deal. And you should know that US and Iran have a long old history. It has a very cold diplomatic international relations between Iran and US, because you know there is a US-Iran coup which happened very long, and even US government installed a puppet president, or the puppet head of the state in 1979, and there was a hostage crisis, and so many. And Iran sometimes threatens Israel, one of US most important ally. Iran makes sure that it often threatens Israel, and Israel often complains it to the United States of America. So that means from the international perspective, global order, they always had a very cold relations. So all these are one of the factors which made USA think again about the whole deal. And you can just see these are the countries: Iran, China, France, Germany, Russia, UK, US. So these are what is called as the P5+1. So whenever you get a question, the prelims also, you should know what you mean by P5+1. And yeah, why did USA want to go back? Because of what I called as sunset clauses. Very important. It is called as the sunset clauses, which will get expire. That means Iran's centrifuges go away after 10 years. It was signed in 2015, as I said. After 10 years, in 2025, the limitation that the treaty placed on centrifuges machine to enrich uranium is gone. They can do it. And after 2030, after 5 years, they don't have limitations on enrichment of uranium. So that makes Iran more powerful in 2030. That was one of the reasons why US went out and pulled out of the deal and put sanctions again on Iran. So these are some of the important points regarding the US-Iran nuclear deal. So I think you'll keep remembering this. Next is important article regarding the Karen rebels, and Myanmar. Very important topic for international relations. You should always know that what is happening, what is the global happening which is taking place in Myanmar. And we talk about Myanmar's, the Karen insurgents burn another government outpost. So you should know what you mean by the Karen rebels. And not only the Karen, you always have something called as the Kachin. You have the Kachin rebels always in Myanmar. So you need to find out what are the role and what is the conditions that is actually happening in Myanmar with the advent of the rebellion insurgents groups like Karen and Kachin. So with this article, let's take a close look at that. And now we'll take a close look at the Karen rebellions. And you see they are very old people. The Karen are actually a very old tribal people. They're actually old tribal people which are original people. And since a lot of history, because you can actually trace it back to the British history. When Burma, you can actually trace it back to the Burmese history under the British rule. So they were the people, the Karens were the rebels or the group of people, the tribal people who were very close with the British people. The Karen people, normally majority of them in those times were Christians, and they were actually very close to the British government and were very loyal to the British government. But these people were always suppressed by, this is the biggest enmity. These people, the group of people, the Karen rebels, the Karen people, they were always suppressed by the Burmese military. So it is a long enmity between the military. They were since long time, at least for 60 years. You can see more than 6 decades. The Burmese people, especially the Karen rebels, were continuously suppressed, oppressed by the Burmese military. So that is the reason why they have a big enmity towards the military. So you can see, and they are actually in the eastern part of Myanmar and very close to the Thailand. So a lot of people that's very close to the Thailand. So you can see that at one end you have the Karen rebels, and on the other side you have the Kachin rebels who are in the northern part of the Myanmar, very close to China. So they are very close to Thailand and they are very close to China. So both these groups are actually having a big enmity between what is called as the junta, the military junta, or the military, the Burmese military, which overthrown Aung San Suu Kyi's government. So the military, they have a big problem. Both the Karens as well as the Kachins have a big time problem regarding the military. So initially they started with a small force, and we have something called as the KNU. You need to find out they also have a KNU, and they also have something called as the Karen Army, which started off from 10,000 people, and now they say they have a huge army ready to protest and ready to fire the military in Myanmar. So when you talk about the Karen people, when you talk about the Karen, majority of the people, they say that the army raped, killed everybody, and majority of them are actually migrating daily basis for jobs in Thailand, for meager jobs. Women, they say that women used to move in big trucks from the morning, and after the work they come back. So they are actually facing a big crisis, a big humanitarian crisis. The Karen people are facing a big humanitarian crisis, and and they have a lot of demands from the governments also. If they want to go for a ceasefire, if they want to ceasefire or end their enmity, they have a lot of demands that the protest, the violence should end, the prisoners should be released, they should get all the standards, the minimum basic security of living. they need basic shelter, everything. They are actually demanding for all that. So it's a huge crisis. The Karen people's refugee crisis. Now majority of them live in as refugees. So their standard of living, everything is gone. So this is the most important random things when you talk about the Karen rebels. And now I think we'll quickly find out the most important points regarding them. And the recent outpost was burned. This is something that happens every day. So this comes in news. And there is KNU called as the Karen National Union, and there is a Karen National Army, which is an armed wing of that. And it is actually the homeland is in eastern Myanmar, and the Kachin is in northern Myanmar. Are two major ethnic armed organizations that have allied themselves with the movement against the junta. And so I think their ultimate enmity is between the military. They are against the Burmese army or the Myanmar army. And let's take another important point. The KNU has been fighting since the British. I've already told that point. And they are largely Christian and favored by the British during the olden times. And after that, they were repressed by the treatment of the Burmese national military. They were oppressed by the military back then. And large people fled their homes. One of the world's least reported refugee crisis. That is the reason why I said we understand about a lot of refugee crisis. Lot of Karen people, the rebels, the common people lost their house. It is a big refugee crisis which is not reported in that level. So that is also very important to be noted here. And you can just see the geography. It is Burma, Myanmar. It is actually in Karen, and this is in Thailand. So majority of the people actually go on work from Karen to Thailand. They go back to this area. The borders are always open. So they go back to Thailand and they come back after the work. Majority of them do low and menial jobs. Majority of them are in crisis. And they're ready to give up. They're ready to cease fire. They're ready to stop the violence if they want security guarantees, end of forced labors, release of prisoners, effective mechanism to monitor the truce. They want the basic services to the underdeveloped regions and land reforms for many of the regions of people where Karen people are. Then they are ready to go for a ceasefire and end violence if they get all these conditions. But you see that most of the young women are squeezed into converted pickup trucks, and they go to Thailand to work in garment factories, domestic servants, men transferring from overnight bus to Rangum, construction sites. So that means this is nothing short of a huge refugee crisis the world is actually seeing. So this is an important topic about the Karen rebels, as well as please remember about the concept of the Kachin rebels also. And I told you their aggression towards the military, the Burmese or the Myanmar military. So this is an important topic of the Karen rebels and Kachin, and I hope now you have a basic idea about both the people. The next important news article that appeared in the international news in today's newspaper is something called as PEGIDA is extremist. The Islamophobic group PEGIDA. What do you mean by PEGIDA? Is becoming more extremist according to the German spy agency. So that means there is a movement in Germany happening which is called as the PEGIDA. It's a movement which started off with few members, has now gained thousands and thousands of followers across. It's a pan-European, the pan-nationalistic European movement. So you need to find out what you mean by PEGIDA. What are the basic doctrines which PEGIDA talks about? This is actually in the world news. So let's quickly find out what do you mean by PEGIDA. And let's take a look at this. The word itself, there is a German word which means PEGIDA, and we'll find out what you mean by the English translation. What do you mean by PEGIDA? So the German spy agency has said that the PEGIDA is highly becoming extremist. So what do you mean by PEGIDA? So basically, it is a group of people who are actually against the Islamization. The very important, they are against the radical Islam concepts. They are against the radical Islam concepts, and that they are regarding the radical Islamization of Europe. These people are actually against the PEGIDA people are actually against the radical Islamization of Europe. So that is what they believe in, and basically they are completely against what you call as they are highly xenophobic. What do you mean by xenophobia? Xenophobia is a fear of people from other countries. So they are highly xenophobic movements which used to march every Monday morning. There used to be a small march, and this is the xenophobic marches of PEGIDA is very popular. So they basically don't like the German identity. They do, they there is some because German people they believe that there is something called as a German identity. Very important to be noted. There is something called as a German identity, and they don't want the German identity to be diluted. That is the key word here. They don't want the German identity to be diluted by immigrants or people from. They don't want the German identity to be diluted by the immigrants. So basically, they are a xenophobic group which don't like, and they don't believe in the radical Islamization. They don't believe in the radical and violent Islamization of Europe. So this is the basic, and you should know that it was actually a small movement in 2014 when somebody started off this movement, and it became a. This actually started. They actually posted a video which showed a Kurdish supporter against the ISIS. So from that onwards, it quickly started to spread. That movement became a huge movement, and back in 2015, when the whole world was looking at Germany, in 2015 there was a huge refugee crisis. Everybody remembers the huge refugee crisis of 2015, and the whole Germany was polarized. That means the whole Germany was polarized, the whole Germany was split, because then the Chancellor Angela Merkel opened the doors of Germany to the asylum seekers. Germany opened the doors to the asylum seekers. So Germany was actually on split, and the PEGIDA movement got a lot of currency during that time. So these is the important aspects regarding PEGIDA. Now I think we'll find the most important aspects of PEGIDA. It is a pan-European anti-Islam far-right political movement, and they believe that Germany is being increasingly Islamicized, and they are actually opposing the Islamic extremism. They don't want that. And PEGIDA means Patriotic Europeans Against the Islamization of the West, and began in 2014. And they don't like the encroaching dilution of Germany through immigrants. This is what I said. They believe in what is called as the German identity, and they don't want the dilution of that. And after 2014 video, it became very, very popular. The group PEGIDA, Patriotic Europeans, they became very popular. And after that, as I said, they're very popular for the xenophobic marches Monday morning. And in the crisis of 2015, Germany was split due to the country's important strategy on opening the doors to the asylum seekers in wake of the refugee crisis. So this is how a movement called as PEGIDA got importantly, very, very important. PEGIDA became very important in this regard. So I think next time when you see the name PEGIDA, you should have an idea about this. The next important news item that we have to discuss is what we call as the Indian offshore model will dominate the IT scene for a long time. Very, very important. So that brings us to a concept of the Indian IT industry, especially the Indian offshore model. What do you mean by offshore model? And that brings us to what you mean by an offshore company and an onshore company. And it says that the US and the European companies, you can just see that both the US and European companies are running out of critical skills, which makes Indian alternative, that means Indian alternates and offshore industries as attractive for tech buyers. That means the US and Europe are running out of critical skills, and India is a great offshore place where a lot of work actually from different parts of the world comes to India. So India offshore model is a good because you have a lot of talent. India has a lot of talent, the work skills, everything is good, and that is why majority of the European countries, the US, everyone is actually offshoring to India. So that is a good sign. So Indian offshore model will dominate the IT scene for some time. That is the latest news which they say. Let's see, let's find out and how that is actually good. So Indian, as I said, majority of the countries, India is actually a good destination for a lot of people from abroad, especially if there are many US companies and European companies operating, offshoring their work to India. Because that is a point relating to what you mean by an offshore company and what do you mean by an onshore company. If United States of America is actually creating a technology and they want the technology, the manpower, everything, consultants, everything, if that company, United States of America, take it from United States of America itself, then that is an onshore technology. That means they have hired it from their own home country. And if United States of America, that USA company is actually hiring its people, consultants, technical solutions, everything in from India, far across India, then it is actually offshoring. This is actually the offshoring ground. This is the offshoring policy. And you should see the majority of the US European companies do this. And the biggest advantage of many advantages, now the work, basically English speaking is actually something very common. You can easily get the English speaking workforce consultants at a lower price with high quality productivity in places like India, in Asia, India, China, and Thailand, parts of Asia, etc. So you get a quality work from all the aspects. So that is the concept of offshoring as well as onshore work. And the current trend says that definitely India is going to benefit from this. Now let's take quickly the as I said, the US and Europe are running out of critical skills, and this makes Indian alternative increasingly attractive. That's an important point to be noted. And even the pandemic, work from home has further raised the openness of global tech buyers to work in a distributed environment away from onshore to client's location. All these are important points that I've just mentioned, and let's take a look at this important points also. Typically, offshore accounts were 70 to 80% of a project, while onshore is used to be 20 to 30% in range, and I hope you know the reason why. In the COVID era, markets are seeing a clear 50% reduction in onshore. Everybody is actually having a limited amount, and more productivity is needed from limited amount. You can see a 50% reduction in the onshore and 5 to 15% rise in the offshore share of work. Now you know the reason why that is happening. It's very obvious that you know why that is happening. And exactly, so all the IT work under it makes India and the Indian model will dominate the IT service for at least another decade. India is going to be a pioneer place for offshore models, especially for works happening from outside. So that is an important point that we just made. And this is an important thing that we told. Difference between onshore and offshore is that offshore involves getting work completed in a different country. For a US company looking to outsource software development, means India, China, Eastern Europe, or Latin America, and the rest of the Asia is very important. That means onshore giving work to organization in the same country. So one is, as I said, in the same country, and say this is the USA and this is India. USA giving works to USA itself, that is onshore. USA giving works to India, that is offshore. And India is going to be a global leader for at least 10 more years. That's going to be very, very something that important thing that you should definitely note here. So that is the concept of onshore, offshore, and how offshore Indian model is going to dominate. Now let's take a look at the next important topic called as the PM KISAN. Also very, very important in the news, PM KISAN, because everything, agriculture is one of the most important areas of UPSC. And it is also very important and pertinent to know what are the most important things happening in the agriculture sector. And for this sector, PM KISAN, the first deck of payment has been released to Bengal farmers. So you should know what you mean by PM KISAN. And we need to find out in this who are the most eligible people and who are not eligible according to the scheme. So let's quickly take a close look at the important provisions of PM KISAN. So what do you mean by PM KISAN? It is actually a fund. 2018 was the most important year when they launched it, that they are giving financial assistance to farmers, most importantly the small and marginal farmers are getting a lot of incentives. That means they get yearly 6,000 rupees. That means they all get 6,000 rupees in 3 equal installments of 2,000 each. So people, they will come into the bank account. So that is actually a bank transfer. So people, especially the small and marginal farmers, will be able to access this financial assistance. And as we have just seen that PM Kisan is getting approved in the Bengal. If we see that more than 7 lakh people, the 7 lakh people beneficiaries in Bengal are going to get benefits of this. They'll receive the first installment of 2000 rupees. Majority of them will receive the first 2000 rupees, and after that more than 9 crore beneficiaries across this country will be benefiting from PM Kisan. So this is actually an incentive scheme. Small and marginal farmers are getting this, and 6,000 amount has been divided into 3 equal installments of 2,000, 2,000, 2,000, and finally that is actually credited into the account of the farmers. So let's take a close look at the other important major provisions that they talk about. And yes, this is the PM Kisan scheme, and about 7 lakh farmers in West Bengal are going to get the first installment of rupees 2,000, and the 9 crore beneficiaries across this country are also going to get benefit. It is a government scheme through which small, very important, small and marginal farmers will get up to 6,000 per minimum income support, and 75,000 crore schemes aim to cover 125 million farmers irrespective of the size holdings in India. A very important point that they made here. And what are the next important point that you will remember here? You have to take a look at this. Sorry. Yes. Let's look at the PM Kisan. The scheme will cover for 6,000 for a valuable 3 installment of 2,000 each, which I have already told you. And the scheme came in 2018. The year is also important. And what is the definition of the family as far as the scheme is concerned? The husband, wife, and minor children is according the most important definition that they give here. And the state government and union administration will identify the farmer families which are eligible for support as per the scheme, and the fund will be directly transferred. They will be directly transferred. So that is the important provisions that we have to note here. And let's see who are the people who are eligible. Land holding farmers, families with cultivable land holding in their names can apply under the scheme. That means land holding farming, families with cultivable land holding can apply. Farmers from both urban as well as rural areas can also apply for PM Kisan. Small and marginal farmer families should apply. So they are the important eligible people who should apply. Then let's see who are not eligible to apply. The ineligible people. Institutional landholders are not applied. The present retired officers of employees of state or central government, autonomous government agencies, PSUs are not allowed. People with higher economic status are not allowed. People who pay income tax are also not allowed. Farmer families having constitutional posts are not allowed. Professional like doctors, engineers, lawyers are not allowed. Retired pensioners with a monthly pension about 10,000 rupees are also not allowed in this important scheme. So that makes, I think I've given about PM Kisan. So this is a money incentive support system, and you should remember it is actually given to these people. 6,000 is split into 2K, 2K, 2K. So that is how the money is split. So this is the important concept of PM Kisan, which was in the news. Next is a happy news for a lot of people, especially we are in the pandemic situation, and it's a good news because India approves Roche's new antibody cocktail. So we are discussing what you mean by an antibody cocktail. So what does this cocktail contain? What does this cocktail contain? It's going to be a good thing for the treatment of COVID, especially from people who are from mild to moderate level. For both category of adults as well as pediatrics, it can be used. And what do you mean by this cocktail? Because it is actually approved by Roche's, and it's made, and in India it's actually distributed by Cipla. So let's find out what you mean by this antibody cocktail. So this is what you call as an antibody cocktail, and let's see what you mean by that. So you need to know antibody cocktail. It talks about Roche is the company here that you can see here. They bought out this, and as I said, this is going to be a pivotal thing for treatment of COVID, especially people who are from mild to moderate. This can easily work out. So they have devised two important antibodies, which are synthetically created. So both of them are synthetically created, and we need to know the names of that. And both of the antibodies are neutralizing antibodies. That is the reason why there is an important thing which is going to happen here. So let's closely look at the important points that is actually here. Check out the pharma. Roche India has received EUA. What do you mean by EUA? It has got the emergency use authorization for COVID-19 and the drug cocktail. You should find out the two important things: the casirivimab and the imidivimab. It's very difficult to pronounce, but still, the casirivimab and the imidivimab are the two important things to be noted in this antibody cocktail. This was developed by the Roche and Regeneron, and the approval was granted by the Central Drug Standards Control Organization, CDSCO. And this is going to further expand India's vaccine arsenal. So the key things that you have to remember is the word, the casirivimab and the imidivimab are the two important things. So we need to discuss what is this cocktail. So this is actually something that Donald Trump used when he was diagnosed with COVID-19. So let's take a close look at the other important points that we have to say. That Trump's angle is something that you can find out. And the antibody cocktail will be marketed and distributed in India through Cipla. Cipla is a very pioneer in this. Cipla will be doing this. And Cipla is also the importer of the distribution of Roche India's patented antibody called as the tocilizumab. Very difficult to pronounce, but still, it is actually the importer of what is called as a tocilizumab. So this word is also important here. And what is this therapy? This therapy consists of two antibodies that I told. There are two antibodies here. One is the casirivimab and the imidivimab. They are synthetically manufactured copies of antibodies that the body produces after an infection. So it is a kind of a mimicking. A body or the normal immune system normally does a mechanism, and this is actually mimicking that. So two synthetically produced antibodies are created called as the casirivimab and the imidivimab, and both the antibodies to mind are neutralizing. Why? That is the reason why. The key question comes: is this cocktail important if there is a mutation happening? What happens if there is a mutation? What happens if there is another variant coming? Will the potency, the word is potency, will it be effective? Will this be effective if there is a mutation or a variant coming here? Do you think it's going to be the effectiveness or the potency? What about that? Let's take a close look at that also. Because the casirivimab and the imidivimab are monoclonal antibodies or lab-made proteins that mimic the immune system's ability to fight off harmful pathogens such as virus. So I already mentioned a concept of mimicking. So these are synthetically created. And the casirivimab and the imidivimab are specifically directed against the spike of protein SARS-CoV-2. So they are specifically directed against this. Very, very important point. And this is a point that I asked. These two specific engineers are creating using a neutralizing antibodies. That is a key word. Neutralizing antibody. That is the reason why it binds to different parts of the virus spike, and the cocktail remain against the widespread of variants and reduces the loss of losing its neutralizing potency even against a new variant. Imagine that there is a mutation, or imagine that there is a new variant being coming. This is a neutralizing antibody, and that is the reason why the potency or the effectiveness will not be lost. The neutralizing potency or the neutralizing capacity of this cocktail will not go even if there are different variants, because there is neutralizing antibodies which is being used in this. So this is an important topic that you should definitely find out, and definitely a very happy point in this regard, because that was something that we discussed about the antibody cocktail, and please remember about the all important points in this regard. Let's go to the next important point, which is called as RBI's Regulatory Review Authority, or the RRA. So now the RRA 2.0 is coming. Sorry, 2.0 is coming. Now previously there was an RRA 1.0, which was in 1999. RBI launched this RRA, the first version, and now the second version is actually coming. So what do you mean by the Regulatory Review Authority? It's a very technical thing, so you should know few things regarding the Regulatory Review Authority. The word regulatory is very, very important. Let's quickly find out what are some of the important points of this. So basically it talks about RBI wants, this is actually related to what is called as regulated entities. There is a new word that we have to define. RBI brings in something called as a regulated entity. So what do you mean by the concept regulated entity? So what do you mean by regulated entity? So for all this regulated entity, there are few important things. You have to reduce, very, very important, you have to reduce what is called as a compliance burden on this regulatory institutions or regulated entity. You have to reduce the compliance burden, and you have to streamline. All these are important keywords. You have to streamline a lot of procedures. You have to streamline a lot of procedures regarding regulated entity, and the reporting should more be easy, and the other procedures and other reporting mechanisms should be actually be more effective. So for that, the RRA2 is being done. That means regulated entities is something at the center. You should know what you mean by regulated entity, and it's asked for reducing compliance burdens on regulated entities and streamline a lot of procedures. So let's quickly understand what are the few important points that they talk about in this regard. Yes, the Reserve Bank said an advisory group has been constituted to assess the RRA. So there is an advisory group which is actually coming here, and that advisory group is headed by SBI MD Janaki Raman. The group will assess the RRA in identifying regulations, guidelines, and returns that should be rationalized. So these are some of the important RRA. For RRA, there is a advisory group under the guidance of Janaki Raman, Director as Janaki Raman. They will actually take care of this. And why RRA? Why RRA? They need to streamline regulations. Very, very important. The key word, as I said, they need to streamline a lot of regulations. A lot of regulations, and reduce the compliance burden, the lot of compliance burden of regulated entities. So that makes us, what you mean by regulated entity. And that is why RBI has set up the Regulatory Review Authority of 2.0 for a period of 1 year with a view to streamline regulations and reduce compliance burden on regulated entities. So we have been hearing this word. Please remember this word about when you read about Regulatory Review of Authority of RBI, streamlining regulations and reducing compliance burden on regulated entities. And let's find out what you mean by regulated entities. So quickly find out. This is actually taken from the RBI's original website. RBI clearly mentions in the website that regulated entity means all scheduled commercial banks, the regional rural banks, the local area banks, private urban cooperative banks, state cooperative banks, and any other entity which has been licensed under section 22 of Banking Regulation Act, which is shall be a group refers to as bank. So normally which are referred to as banks apart from commercial banks, RRB, local area banks, cooperative banks, urban cooperative banks, which is licensed under 22. So these are called as regulated entities. And all India financial institutions, all NBFCs, miscellaneous MNBCs, non-banking companies, and RNBCs, residuary non-banking companies. So all these are terms that you have to study for prelims as well as main. What do you mean by RNBC? What are MNBC and NBFC? Something that you should know. And all payment system providers, the PSP, system participants, prepaid payment instrument issuers, the PPI issuers, and all authorized person, including those money agents regulated by the. So all these entities, in short, means regulated entities. Very, very important. They means RE. This is taken from the RBI's website. For this, what we have to do, you have to streamline a lot of regulations and reduce the complaints burden on many of the regulated entities. So that is why RRA is actually here. So this is what you mean by regulated entities. And now let's quickly move on to the other important provisions that they talk about. You know why in 1999 RBI set up an RRA? In those times, we'll take, why did RRA in 1999 come? Reviewing the regulations, obviously regulations, circulars, reporting systems based on the feedback from public banks and financial institutions. So that is why they were actually reviewed. The review committee actually reviewed a lot of regulations. So at one time, here you have the public banks and you have the public banks or the PB, and in here we have the financial institutions on one side. And the feedback was taken. The feedback was taken from them on what? Regulations, circulars, reporting systems, everything. The feedback from public banks and financial institutions was taken, and then they made a review. That is the reason why RRA came up with streamlining and increasing the effectiveness of several procedures. Several procedures became much more better, and even simplifying regulatory prescriptions. Economics is a very difficult topic, people don't understand, but still. So their feedback was taken at this point, and considering the development in regulatory functions of RBI over the past 2 decades and regulatory evolution of a regulatory perimeter by RBI, you need to understand that the RRA is going to be an important concept in this. So please read it and try to understand. So in short, let's quickly understand. Many of you might not even click this, but simply understand that. I hope you remember the 1999 RRA and remember the latest RRA 2.0. And the most important thing that they say is they need to make instructions more effective by eliminating duplications. That is point number 1. To reduce the complaints by revoking obsolete instructions. Point number 2. To obtain feedback from the regulated entities and to suggest the required changes for dissemination process. So that means, in short, the RRA denotes to all this important thing. They need to denominate duplications, obsolete instructions, getting a good feedback. So please remember, this will help what? RRA will help what? Will streamline more regulations. Streamline regulations plus reduce complaints burden. That is the most important word. That will reduce complaints burden. So this is what is in short means RBI's RRA, or the Regulatory Review Authority. So I think you will understand these are some of the important aspects of this.